sleep study.
"100 Ancient Lessons That Still Hold True Today." Part 1. What if I told you that some of the most powerful insights for navigating modern life were discovered thousands of years ago? That the same principles guiding ancient philosophers, strategists, and thinkers could revolutionize how you make decisions, solve problems, and understand the world around you today. These aren't dusty relics from history books. These are battle-tested mental frameworks that have survived because they work. They've guided emperors and entrepreneurs, scientists and storytellers through challenges remarkably similar to what we face right now. Today, we're diving into the first 11 of these timeless lessons. Think of them as mental tools that can cut through confusion, reveal hidden patterns, and help you see reality more clearly than ever before. First principles thinking. This is one of the most powerful mental models for understanding reality. It allows you to cut through assumptions, get to the core of a problem, and build solutions from the ground up. Most people rely on borrowed thinking. They do what others have done, make small tweaks, or follow standard rules. That might work for simple tasks, but when the challenge is new, complex, or broken, copying the past usually fails. First principles thinking starts by asking, what do I know for sure? What are the basic facts, independent of trends, habits, or opinions? Once you've got those, you rebuild from scratch. Here's a simple example. Imagine you're trying to eat healthier. Most people look up popular diet plans or follow what worked for someone else. But first principles thinking asks, what does my body actually need to function well? At the most basic level, it needs enough protein, vitamins, energy, and hydration. Once you understand those needs, you can build a diet that works for you, regardless of fads, labels, or influences. This way of thinking changes how you approach everything: health, work, money, even relationships. It makes you ask better questions. It forces you to stop leaning on defaults and start thinking clearly. It's not about being a contrarian, it's about getting to what's real. Because when you understand the fundamentals, you don't just copy what works, you understand why it works. That gives you power, not just to follow, but to innovate. First principles thinking won't make decisions for you, but it gives you something better: clarity. And in a noisy world, that might be the most valuable tool of all. Second order thinking. Some decisions feel right in the moment, but end up causing problems later. That's where second order thinking comes in. Second order thinking is a mental model that helps you look beyond the immediate outcome of a decision and consider what might happen next. Instead of stopping at the first effect, you ask what that effect might lead to. This kind of thinking helps you anticipate long-term consequences and avoid unintended results. For example, imagine a company cuts prices to attract more customers. First order thinking says lower prices equal more sales. But second order thinking asks, what happens after that? Maybe the profit margin shrinks. Maybe competitors drop their prices too, leading to a price war. Maybe the brand becomes associated with cheapness, which hurts its long-term image. What seemed smart at first could turn out to be damaging. This model applies to everyday life too. Suppose you stay up late to finish a project. First order thinking says you met the deadline, but second order thinking considers the impact of lost sleep. Will your focus drop tomorrow? Will that lead to more mistakes or missed opportunities? The goal is not to overthink every decision. It's to slow down enough to consider more than just the immediate win. Many of the worst outcomes in history, from failed policies to financial crises, happened because people only looked one step ahead. Second order thinking doesn't require advanced knowledge. It just takes the habit of asking, and then what? Over and over until you see the bigger picture. It helps you make choices that aren't just good today, but still make sense tomorrow. In a world full of quick fixes and short-term rewards, this kind of thinking gives you an edge that most people overlook. Circle of competence. Everyone has things they're good at and things they're not. The problem is, most of us think we know more than we do. The circle of competence is a mental model that helps fix that. It simply means knowing what you understand well and staying within that area when making important decisions. You don't have to know everything. You just need to know what you actually know and be honest about what you don't. Your circle might include topics you've studied, problems you've solved, or industries you've worked in. For example, a doctor probably has a strong grasp of medical decisions, but might not be the best person to guess where interest rates are headed. A software engineer might be great at designing systems, but not necessarily qualified to give parenting advice. The point is, being smart in one area doesn't mean you're smart in all of them. Trouble starts when people step outside their circle without realizing it. An investor might take a risky bet on a business they don't understand. A leader might ignore expert advice and try to fix something they've never dealt with before. When decisions go wrong in these situations, it's often not about intelligence. It's about drifting too far outside the boundary of what they actually know. This model isn't about limiting growth. It's about making better choices. Knowing your circle helps you act with more confidence when you're inside it and ask better questions when you're not. It keeps you grounded and reduces overconfidence, which is a major source of error in both everyday life and big decisions. Understanding the limits of your knowledge is a strength, and recognizing where those limits are, that's the value of knowing your circle of competence. Thought experiment. You don't always need a lab to test an idea. Sometimes all you need is your mind. A thought experiment is a mental exercise where you imagine a situation to explore its logic, consequences, or contradictions. It's a way of testing ideas without needing to physically run an experiment. Philosophers, scientists, and thinkers have used thought experiments for centuries to challenge assumptions and uncover deeper truths. One of the most famous examples is Schrödinger's cat. In this setup, a cat is placed in a sealed box with a mechanism that has a 50% chance of killing it based on a random quantum event. Until someone opens the box, the cat is considered both alive and dead at the same time. Schrödinger wasn't suggesting anyone should do this. He was using the scenario to highlight the strange behavior of particles in quantum physics. Thought experiments work because they strip away the noise. By isolating variables in an imagined scenario, they help us focus on the core logic of a problem. For example, the trolley problem, often used in ethics discussions, forces people to confront difficult trade-offs by removing distractions and zeroing in on one moral choice. These mental models aren't just for scientists and philosophers. Anyone can use them. You might imagine how a new policy would affect a company before trying it, or picture how someone might react to a decision you're about to make. In both cases, you're mentally simulating outcomes to improve your thinking. Thought experiments don't give you answers, but they make your thinking sharper. They help clarify complex issues, reveal hidden assumptions, and push ideas to their limits, all without leaving your chair. Probabilistic thinking. Most people want a clear answer, yes or no, right or wrong, win or lose, but the real world rarely works like that. Probabilistic thinking is a mental model that helps you deal with uncertainty. Instead of asking, will this happen or not, it asks, how likely is this to happen? It's about thinking in terms of chances and weighing possibilities, instead of relying on black and white outcomes. Imagine you're planning a picnic. The weather forecast says there's a 30% chance of rain. That doesn't mean it will rain or it won't. It means there's a 3 in 10 chance you'll get wet. A lot of people ignore that and plan as if it's definitely going to be sunny or definitely going to storm. Probabilistic thinking means you prepare for both and manage the risk. This mindset becomes even more important when the stakes are high. A business might launch a new product knowing there's a 60% chance of success, but also a 40% chance of failure. That doesn't mean they made a bad decision if it fails. It just means they took a calculated risk. Over time, consistently making decisions based on good probabilities is what leads to success. Probabilistic thinking also helps avoid emotional overreactions. If something unlikely happens, like a rare event or a freak accident, it doesn't always mean you made a bad call. It just means you were playing the odds, and sometimes the odds don't break your way. This kind of thinking requires practice. It means getting comfortable with uncertainty, using data when possible, and making peace with the fact that good decisions can still lead to bad outcomes. It's not about predicting the future perfectly. It's about playing the game wisely over time. Inversion. People try to reach their goals by asking what they need to do. But there's another approach that's often more effective. Ask what to avoid. Inversion is a mental model that flips a problem on its head. Instead of only thinking forward, you also think in reverse. If the goal is success, inversion asks, what would cause failure? If the goal is happiness, inversion asks, what creates misery? It works by focusing on what not to do, which is often more obvious and easier to control. This kind of thinking is useful because we're often too focused on ideal outcomes. We imagine what we want, but ignore the obstacles that stop people from getting there. Inversion brings those blind spots to the surface. It's a practical way to avoid common mistakes before they happen. For example, if you want to run a successful meeting, most people plan the agenda and talking points. Inversion asks, what would ruin the meeting? Maybe showing up unprepared, dominating the conversation, or not listening. Avoiding those things could be just as important as what you include. It applies across all kinds of decisions. Athletes use it to identify habits that lead to injury. Startups use it to predict what might cause them to fail. Even in relationships, you can use inversion to avoid behaviors that damage trust. Inversion doesn't mean you only focus on the negatives. It means you balance your thinking by working from both directions. Forward thinking shows you what to aim for. Inversion shows you what to steer away from. The two together create a clearer path. By removing the obvious sources of failure, inversion often reveals what really matters, long before the consequences arrive. It's a simple shift in mindset, but one that changes how problems are solved. Occam's razor. When something goes wrong, people often jump to the most complicated explanation, but more often than not, the simplest answer is the right one. Occam's razor is a mental model that helps you cut through confusion. It suggests that when you're faced with multiple explanations for the same thing, the one with the fewest assumptions is usually the most accurate. It's not about being lazy or ignoring complexity. It's about not adding extra layers unless you really need to. Let's say your internet stops working. One explanation is that the entire service provider's infrastructure has failed. Another is that your Wi-Fi router just needs to be restarted. Occam's razor would tell you to start with the second one. It's simpler, it relies on fewer assumptions, and in most cases, it turns out to be correct. This kind of thinking is useful because people love complex stories. We often overcomplicate problems, not because the situation demands it, but because our brains like patterns, drama, or hidden meanings. Occam's razor helps counter that tendency by reminding us to keep our reasoning grounded. In science, the model plays a huge role. If two theories predict the same result, scientists prefer the one that is simpler and cleaner, as long as it still fits the evidence. The same idea applies in business, medicine, and everyday problem solving. Occam's razor isn't a guarantee that the simplest idea is always true. It's just a rule of thumb that keeps you from adding unnecessary explanations too soon. It helps you focus on what is most likely, instead of getting lost in what is merely possible. In a world full of noise, this kind of clarity makes decisions faster, reasoning sharper, and thinking more reliable. Hanlon's razor. You send someone a message and they don't reply. Hours go by, then days. It's easy to assume they're ignoring you on purpose. But what if they just forgot? Hanlon's razor is a mental model that helps you interpret other people's actions with more clarity and less stress. It says, never attribute to malice that which can be explained by mistake, forgetfulness, or basic human error. In other words, most people aren't trying to harm you. They're just distracted, rushed, or unaware. This idea is important because we're naturally wired to take things personally. If someone cuts us off in traffic, shows up late, or forgets to follow through, it's tempting to assume bad intentions. But Hanlon's razor encourages us to pause and consider a more likely explanation. They weren't thinking about us at all. It doesn't mean people never act with bad intent. Some do. But most of the time, poor outcomes come from miscommunication, not manipulation. People miss meetings because they wrote the wrong time. They don't respond to emails because they got buried in their inbox. They seem rude because they're having a rough day, not because they're targeting anyone. Using Hanlon's razor reduces unnecessary conflict. It helps in relationships, in the workplace, and in public life. It encourages a mindset that gives others the benefit of the doubt, at least until the facts show otherwise. It's not about being naive. It's about not jumping to conclusions too quickly. By applying this mental model, you save energy, avoid pointless arguments, and create more room for understanding. In a world full of stress and assumptions, Hanlon's razor is a tool for staying grounded, patient, and focused on what is actually true. The map is not the territory. When you look at a subway map, it helps you get around the city. But you probably know the map is not drawn to scale. It doesn't show how loud the train is, how crowded the platform gets, or what it smells like underground. It simplifies things so you can make decisions quickly. That's the point. And that's what the map is not the territory is all about. This mental model reminds us that any idea, label, chart, or belief we use to understand something is just a version of the real thing. It can be helpful, but it is never complete. The territory is reality. The map is just a tool we use to try to navigate it. Think of a restaurant review. It might say the service was slow or the food was amazing, but until you go there yourself, you don't know the full story. Maybe the atmosphere is warm, maybe the staff was overwhelmed that day. Reviews are maps, the actual visit is the territory. This idea also applies to how we think about people. A job title, a personality label, or even a social media profile might seem informative, but none of those tell you who someone really is. They are just snapshots, useful, but not enough. Problems happen when people forget the difference. A manager might rely too much on a spreadsheet and miss what's really going on with the team. A traveler might trust a weather app and leave the umbrella at home, only to get caught in the rain. Mistaking the map for the territory leads to blind spots. That's why this model matters. It teaches us to be cautious with assumptions and to stay alert to what reality is actually telling us. Relativity. You and someone else watch the same movie. You think it was slow and boring. They think it was deep and emotional. Same story, same screen, two completely different reactions. That's relativity in action. Relativity, in this context, isn't about physics. It's about perception. It means that the way we interpret the world is shaped by our own position, experiences, and mental frameworks. What seems obvious or logical to one person might seem confusing or wrong to someone else, simply because they're coming from a different angle. Take a thermostat in a room. The temperature is fixed, but one person might feel chilly while another feels warm, or think about two drivers in traffic. One is rushing to work and sees every red light as an obstacle. The other is coming back from vacation and barely notices the delay. The same situation, but their experience of it is completely different. Relativity also explains why people often talk past each other in debates. A policy that feels necessary and fair to someone in a big city might seem intrusive or impractical to someone in a rural town. Their views aren't random. They're shaped by the environments they know. The frame of reference changes how they interpret the facts. Understanding relativity helps not just with empathy, but with better thinking. It reminds us that our view is just one perspective. It doesn't mean all perspectives are automatically correct, but it does mean we should be cautious about assuming ours is the full picture. Relativity encourages us to look harder at how we form our opinions, to question what we take for granted, to notice our blind spots, and to make space for the fact that other people are also seeing the world through lenses of their own. Reciprocity. If you hold the door open for someone, they often say thank you. If you offer to help a friend move, they're more likely to help you later. These small moments are driven by one powerful idea: reciprocity. Reciprocity is the principle that people tend to return what they receive. If someone treats us with kindness, we feel inclined to do the same. If someone is rude or dismissive, we often respond in kind. This simple loop of give and take plays a massive role in how relationships, communities, and even economies function. At its core, reciprocity is about balance. It encourages cooperation, builds trust, and makes social life smoother. Businesses use it in marketing, offering free samples or trials, knowing that people will often feel a pull to give something back. Leaders use it to earn loyalty by showing respect and fairness first. But reciprocity goes deeper than manners or tactics. It reflects a broader truth about human interaction. People tend to mirror what they're shown. If you treat others with honesty, patience, or generosity, that energy often comes back around. Not always, and not instantly, but often enough to matter. This makes reciprocity more than just a reaction. It becomes a strategy. When you take the first step in offering something positive, with no guarantee of return, you're not just being nice. You're setting the tone for how others relate to you. It's not about keeping score. It's about shaping the environment you're part of. Reciprocity isn't magic, but it is reliable. And understanding how it works helps you build better relationships, stronger teams, and a more stable foundation in just about every part of life. In a world full of uncertainty, it is one of the few forces you can influence directly by choosing to go first. These 11 mental models are just the beginning. Each one offers a different lens for seeing the world more clearly, making better decisions, and understanding the forces that shape our lives. They've guided humanity for thousands of years because they work. They cut through noise, reveal patterns, and help us navigate complexity with wisdom that transcends any single era. But here's what makes them truly powerful. They compound. The more you use them, the more natural they become. The more natural they become, the better your thinking gets. And better thinking leads to better outcomes in every area of your life. These aren't abstract concepts to memorize. They're practical tools to use. Start with one that resonates with you. Apply it to a decision you're facing today. Notice how it changes your perspective. Then try another. Over time, these mental models become part of how you see the world, not as separate techniques, but as integrated wisdom that guides you toward clearer thinking and better choices. The ancients discovered these patterns because they had to. Their survival depended on understanding how the world really works. Today, our challenges may look different, but the underlying principles remain the same. Human nature hasn't changed. The dynamics of cause and effect, uncertainty, and decision-making are as relevant now as they were thousands of years ago. That's the beauty of timeless wisdom. It doesn't become obsolete. It becomes more valuable as the world grows more complex. In an age of information overload, these mental models help you focus on what matters. In an era of rapid change, they provide stable frameworks for navigation. In a time of endless opinions, they help you think for yourself. Use them well. The ancients would be proud. 100 Ancient Lessons That Still Hold True. Today, Part 2. Continuing our exploration of timeless wisdom, we now delve deeper into the mental models and frameworks that have guided human decision-making for millennia. These next 10 ancient lessons reveal how our ancestors understood complex systems, managed uncertainty, and navigated the challenges of existence with remarkable sophistication. Systems, thinking, and interconnectedness. The ancient Chinese concept of systems thinking recognized that everything exists within interconnected webs of relationships. Long before modern ecology or complexity theory, ancient philosophers understood that changing one element inevitably affects the whole. This wisdom appears in Taoist teachings about the balance between yin and yang, where opposing forces create harmony through their interaction rather than conflict. Consider how traditional farmers practiced crop rotation, not just for soil health, but because they understood the intricate relationships between plants, insects, weather patterns, and seasonal cycles. They saw the farm as a living system where each component supported the others. This holistic perspective prevented the kind of short-sighted thinking that leads to environmental degradation or system collapse. In modern contexts, systems thinking helps us understand why quick fixes often fail and why sustainable solutions require considering multiple interconnected factors. Whether managing a business, planning a city, or addressing climate change, the ancient wisdom of seeing the whole, rather than just the parts, remains invaluable. The paradox of control. Ancient Stoic philosophers discovered a profound paradox. The more desperately we try to control external circumstances, the less control we actually have. This led to their fundamental distinction between what is up to us and what is not up to us. Marcus Aurelius wrote extensively about this, noting that we can control our thoughts, judgments, and responses, but not other people, natural events, or outcomes. This ancient insight directly challenges modern society's obsession with controlling every variable. The Stoics understood that true power comes from focusing your energy entirely on what you can influence, while accepting what you cannot. This doesn't mean passive resignation, but rather strategic allocation of effort and emotional energy. Buddhist teachings parallel this wisdom through the concept of non-attachment. The Buddha taught that suffering comes from clinging to outcomes, while peace comes from engaging fully with life, while remaining unattached to specific results. This ancient understanding of control helps explain why some people remain calm under pressure, while others become overwhelmed by circumstances beyond their influence. Anti-fragility through stress. Long before Nassim Taleb coined the term anti-fragility, ancient cultures understood that systems become stronger through controlled stress and challenge. Greek and Roman military training deliberately exposed soldiers to hardship not just to build physical strength, but to develop mental resilience and adaptability. Ancient agricultural practices embodied this principle through techniques like pruning, where cutting back plants actually stimulates stronger growth. Traditional medicine systems used small doses of stress, whether through fasting, cold exposure, or controlled physical challenge, to strengthen the body's adaptive capabilities. The ancient principle appears in mythology and storytelling traditions worldwide, where heroes must face increasingly difficult trials to develop the strength needed for their ultimate challenge. These stories encode the understanding that growth requires stress, that comfort leads to weakness, and that avoiding all difficulty ultimately makes us more fragile. Modern research on hormesis validates this ancient wisdom, showing that controlled exposure to stressors, whether physical, mental, or emotional, can indeed make biological and psychological systems more robust. The key insight from ancient traditions is that the stress must be voluntary, manageable, and followed by recovery periods, compound effects, and patience. Ancient Chinese bamboo cultivation provides a perfect metaphor for understanding compound effects. Bamboo appears to grow incredibly slowly for years, with little visible progress above ground. Then, seemingly overnight, it shoots up dozens of feet in a matter of weeks. The ancient farmers understood that the years of slow growth were building an extensive root system that would support rapid vertical expansion. This principle appears across ancient wisdom traditions in different forms. The Greek concept of excellence through habit, captured in Aristotle's observation that we are what we repeatedly do, recognizes that small, consistent actions compound over time to create dramatic transformations. Ancient financial wisdom, preserved in texts like the Babylonian clay tablets, emphasized the power of consistent saving and investment over time. These early financial advisors understood that wealth accumulation follows exponential rather than linear patterns, making patience and consistency more valuable than dramatic gestures. The compound principle extends beyond material accumulation to skill development, relationship building, and character formation. Ancient traditions recognize that the most profound changes happen gradually, often invisibly, through the accumulation of small daily choices and practices. Redundancy as strength. Ancient civilizations built remarkable redundancy into their most critical systems, understanding that backup plans and multiple pathways create resilience. Roman roads famously led to Rome through multiple routes, ensuring that trade and communication could continue even if primary paths were blocked. Ancient Egyptian granaries stored multiple years' worth of food, creating buffers against inevitable periods of scarcity. Traditional architecture incorporated redundancy through massive stone construction, multiple load-bearing elements, and designs that could withstand various types of natural disasters. These builders understood that over-engineering critical infrastructure was not wasteful, but essential for long-term survival. Ancient military strategy emphasized redundancy through multiple battle formations, backup commanders, and distributed supply lines. Successful ancient armies didn't rely on single points of failure, but created systems that could adapt and continue functioning, even when parts were compromised. In personal development, ancient wisdom traditions built redundancy through multiple sources of meaning, diverse skills, and varied social connections. They understood that relying too heavily on any single source of identity, income, or purpose creates dangerous vulnerability. The wisdom of constraints. Ancient cultures discovered that limitations often spark creativity and innovation rather than hindering it. Japanese poetry forms like haiku achieve profound beauty through strict structural constraints. Ancient architectural marvels emerged from working within the limitations of available materials and tools, leading to innovations that modern engineering still admires. Religious and philosophical traditions worldwide incorporated voluntary constraints through practices like fasting, celibacy, or meditation. These limitations weren't punishments, but tools for developing discipline, creativity, and spiritual insight. By voluntarily accepting constraints, practitioners developed the ability to find freedom within boundaries. Ancient legal systems understood that unlimited freedom leads to chaos, while well-designed constraints create the framework within which genuine freedom can flourish. The most enduring ancient law codes balanced individual liberty with social responsibility through carefully crafted limitations. Modern research on creativity confirms this ancient insight, showing that constraints often enhance rather than limit innovative thinking. The ancient understanding that boundaries can be liberating rather than restrictive remains relevant in everything from artistic creation to business strategy. Cyclical time and renewal. Unlike modern linear time concepts, ancient cultures understood time as cyclical, with recurring patterns of growth, maturity, decline, and renewal. This perspective appears in agricultural cycles, seasonal celebrations, and mythological traditions that emphasize eternal return and regeneration. Ancient Chinese philosophy captured this in the concept of the dynastic cycle, where political systems inevitably move through phases of founding energy, stable governance, corruption, and collapse, followed by renewal. This understanding helped ancient leaders recognize when systems needed refreshing rather than mere reform. The Hindu concept of cosmic cycles, or yugas, describes vast periods of creation, preservation, destruction, and recreation. This framework helps people understand their place within larger patterns and accept both positive and negative phases as necessary parts of natural cycles. Ancient wisdom traditions used this cyclical understanding to develop practices of periodic renewal, sabbaticals, jubilee years, ritual cleansing, and regular festivals that marked transitions and fresh beginnings. They understood that without conscious renewal, systems inevitably decay and stagnate. Emergence and collective intelligence. Ancient cultures recognized that groups could develop intelligence and capabilities that exceed the sum of their individual parts. Traditional tribal councils, ancient Greek democracy, and various forms of collective decision-making were designed to tap into this emergent wisdom. Ancient building techniques like stone masonry relied on emergence, individual stones with no inherent structural capability becoming incredibly strong when properly arranged together. Ancient architects understood that the strength came not from individual components, but from their relationships and interactions. Traditional ecological knowledge embodied this principle through understanding how individual species interactions create ecosystem stability and productivity. Ancient peoples managed landscapes not by controlling individual elements, but by facilitating beneficial emergent properties through careful intervention. Ancient storytelling traditions recognized that meaning emerges from the interaction between story, teller, and audience, rather than residing in any single element. The most powerful ancient stories were designed to generate new insights through the dynamic interaction of narrative elements with listeners' experiences, memento mori, and finite resources. Ancient traditions worldwide developed practices for remembering mortality, not to create morbid obsession, but to inspire wise use of limited time and energy. Roman generals returning from victory were accompanied by slaves whispering, "Memento mori, remember you must die," to maintain perspective amid triumph. Ancient Stoic philosophers regularly contemplated death and loss, not to become pessimistic, but to appreciate present blessings and make decisions aligned with what truly matters. This practice of negative visualization helped them prepare mentally for inevitable losses, while increasing gratitude for current circumstances. Buddhist meditation on impermanence serves similar functions, helping practitioners recognize the transient nature of all phenomena and adjust their priorities accordingly. Rather than being depressing, this awareness typically leads to greater appreciation of life and more skillful choices about how to spend precious time. Ancient economic systems often incorporated awareness of resource limits through practices like sabbatical years, jubilee cycles, and sustainable harvesting traditions. These cultures understood that treating finite resources as infinite leads to depletion and collapse. The middle way and dynamic balance. Perhaps one of the most sophisticated ancient insights is the principle of dynamic balance, the understanding that optimal states exist between extremes and must be continuously maintained rather than achieved once. The Buddha's middle way emerged from his recognition that both extreme asceticism and indulgence led to suffering, while the path between them led to liberation. Ancient Chinese medicine understood health as dynamic balance between opposing forces rather than the absence of disease. Traditional treatments aimed not to eliminate all symptoms, but to restore the body's natural ability to maintain equilibrium amid changing conditions. Ancient Greek concepts of the golden mean recognized that virtues exist as balanced points between opposing vices. Courage, for instance, exists between the extremes of cowardice and recklessness. This understanding helped ancient peoples develop character through finding appropriate responses to varying circumstances, rather than following rigid rules. Ancient architectural principles incorporated dynamic balance through designs that appeared stable, while actually flexing and adapting to environmental stresses. The most enduring ancient structures survived not through rigidity, but through flexible strength that could absorb and redirect forces rather than simply resisting them. These 10 additional mental models from ancient wisdom traditions demonstrate the remarkable sophistication of our ancestors' understanding of complex systems, human psychology, and natural principles. They developed frameworks for thinking that remain relevant precisely because they address fundamental aspects of existence that haven't changed despite technological progress. The beauty of these ancient lessons lies not just in their individual insights, but in how they work together as integrated approaches to living wisely. They remind us that true wisdom involves understanding relationships, accepting limitations, preparing for uncertainty, and maintaining dynamic balance in an ever-changing world. As we navigate modern challenges with ancient wisdom, we discover that the most profound insights about human flourishing transcend any particular era or culture. These timeless principles continue to offer guidance because they emerge from careful observation of patterns that persist across centuries and civilizations, revealing fundamental truths about how to live well in a complex and uncertain world. Ancient Lessons for Modern Life, a philosophical journey through timeless wisdom. Part 3, Wisdom's Enduring Voice. As we continue our exploration of timeless wisdom, we encounter principles that bridge the gap between ancient insight and contemporary necessity. The human condition remains remarkably consistent across millennia, and the challenges we face today often echo those confronted by our ancestors thousands of years ago. Consider the ancient concept of memento mori, literally meaning, remember, you will die. This wasn't morbid obsession, but profound wisdom. Roman generals returning from victory would have a slave whisper these words in their ears during triumph parades. Why? Because remembering mortality clarifies priorities, strips away pretense, and focuses attention on what truly matters. In our age of endless distraction and artificial urgency, this ancient reminder becomes revolutionary. When you remember that your time is finite, you stop wasting it on trivial pursuits and meaningless conflicts. This awareness of mortality naturally leads to another ancient principle, the middle way. Developed in Buddhist philosophy, but echoed across cultures, the middle way teaches us to avoid extremes. It's not about mediocrity or compromise. It's about finding the sustainable path between opposing forces. Consider modern debates about work-life balance. The middle way suggests neither complete workaholism nor total leisure, but a dynamic equilibrium that serves long-term flourishing. Ancient wisdom knew that extremes, while temporarily exciting, ultimately lead to exhaustion and collapse. The Stoics gave us another enduring framework, the dichotomy of control. They divided all things into 3 categories: what we completely control, what we partially control, and what we cannot control at all. We completely control our thoughts, judgments, and responses. We partially control our health, relationships, and career outcomes through our actions, though external factors also play a role. We cannot control the weather, other people's choices, or the past. This simple framework, developed over 2,000 years ago, remains one of the most practical tools for mental clarity and emotional resilience in the modern world. Ancient cultures also understood something we're rediscovering: the power of narrative. Humans are storytelling creatures. We don't just gather information, we weave it into stories that give our lives meaning and direction. The ancients knew that the stories we tell ourselves about our experiences shape our reality more than the raw facts themselves. This insight predates modern psychology by millennia, yet it remains profoundly relevant. The narrative you construct about your setbacks, your relationships, your purpose in life, becomes the lens through which you interpret every new experience. The concept of amor fati, loving one's fate, represents perhaps the most challenging yet transformative ancient wisdom. It doesn't mean passive acceptance or resignation. Instead, it means embracing reality so completely that you wouldn't change your experiences, even the difficult ones, because they've shaped who you've become. This isn't naive optimism. It's a mature recognition that resistance to reality creates suffering, while acceptance creates space for growth and action. Ancient wisdom also recognized the importance of rhythm and seasons in human life. The Chinese concept of wu wei, often translated as non-action, doesn't mean inactivity, but rather acting in harmony with natural timing and circumstances. Sometimes the wise action is to push forward. Sometimes it's to wait, observe, and prepare. Modern culture often pressures us toward constant action and growth, but ancient wisdom reminds us that rest, reflection, and strategic patience are equally important. The Greeks gave us the concept of arete, often translated as virtue or excellence, but more accurately understood as living up to your potential. Arete isn't about moral perfection, it's about becoming the fullest version of yourself. This principle recognizes that each person has unique capacities and circumstances, and excellence means developing those capacities within your particular context. It's not about comparing yourself to others, but about honoring your own potential. Consider the ancient understanding of friendship, particularly Aristotle's 3 types: friendships of utility, pleasure, and virtue. Utility friendships serve mutual benefit. Pleasure friendships provide enjoyment, but virtue friendships are based on mutual respect for each other's character and shared commitment to growth. These categories help us understand why some relationships endure while others fade, and why the deepest friendships often weather significant changes in circumstances, while superficial ones do not. The ancients also understood the paradox of strength through vulnerability. The Tao Te Ching speaks of water as the softest thing that overcomes the hardest. This isn't weakness disguised as strength. It's recognizing that true power often comes from adaptability, persistence, and the ability to flow around obstacles rather than breaking against them. In our culture that often equates strength with rigidity, this ancient wisdom offers a more nuanced and ultimately more effective approach to challenges. Ancient cultures developed sophisticated understandings of decision-making that modern behavioral science has only recently validated. They knew about the dangers of analysis paralysis, the importance of intuition in complex situations, and the value of seeking counsel from multiple perspectives. They understood that good judgment develops through experience, reflection, and exposure to diverse viewpoints. The concept of legacy thinking appears across ancient cultures. This isn't about monuments or fame, but about considering the long-term impact of our choices. Ancient wisdom asked, What kind of ancestor do you want to be? This question shifts perspective from immediate gratification to generational responsibility. It encourages decisions that serve not just our current needs, but the well-being of those who come after us. Perhaps most importantly, ancient wisdom recognized that knowledge without application is sterile. The goal wasn't merely to understand these principles intellectually, but to integrate them into daily life through practice. The Stoics spoke of philosophy as medicine for the soul. Buddhist traditions emphasized mindfulness as a way of living, not just thinking. These weren't academic exercises, but practical tools for navigating life's complexities. The remarkable thing about these ancient insights is how they complement rather than contradict each other. Memento Mori works with the dichotomy of control to create urgency around what matters while releasing attachment to what doesn't. The middle way supports arete by finding sustainable approaches to excellence. Amor fati strengthens our ability to practice wu wei by reducing resistance to natural timing and circumstances. These principles also scale beautifully from personal to social application. A society that remembers mortality invests in education and infrastructure for future generations. A culture that practices the middle way avoids the extremes of both oppression and chaos. Communities that understand the dichotomy of control focus their collective energy on solvable problems rather than wasting it on blame and resentment. What makes this ancient wisdom so enduring is its foundation in human nature rather than technological or cultural specifics. While the surface details of life change dramatically across centuries, the fundamental challenges of being human remain constant. How do we find meaning? How do we handle suffering? How do we relate to others? How do we make good decisions under uncertainty? How do we balance individual needs with collective responsibility? Ancient wisdom offers tested answers to these perennial questions. Not final answers, but frameworks that have proven useful across diverse cultures and circumstances. They provide what we might call existential technologies, tools for navigating the human condition that remain effective regardless of external changes. This doesn't mean we should reject modern insights or attempt to live exactly as the ancients did. Rather, it means recognizing that some forms of wisdom transcend their historical context and remain relevant precisely because they address unchanging aspects of human experience. The goal isn't to become ancient, but to integrate their hard-won insights with contemporary understanding. As we move forward in an age of unprecedented change and complexity, these ancient principles offer both anchor and compass. They ground us in tested wisdom while providing direction for navigating new challenges. They remind us that while technology changes rapidly, human wisdom accumulates slowly and deserves respect. Most importantly, they suggest that the path to flourishing, individually and collectively, isn't about inventing entirely new approaches, but about rediscovering and applying perennial truths in contemporary contexts. The ancients would likely be amazed by our technological capabilities, but unsurprised by our fundamental struggles. They would recognize our debates about meaning, purpose, relationships, and ethics as variations on themes they explored extensively. Their gift to us isn't a set of rigid rules, but a collection of flexible principles, tested by time and refined by countless generations of human experience. In embracing this ancient wisdom, we don't retreat from modernity, but rather equip ourselves to engage with it more thoughtfully and effectively. We gain access to humanity's longest-running conversation about how to live well, and we add our own voices to that ongoing dialogue. The result is a richer, more nuanced understanding of both our challenges and our possibilities, one that honors the past while embracing the future. Feedback loops. When you speak into a microphone and hear your voice echo back through the speakers, you're experiencing a feedback loop. A feedback loop happens when the output of a system is fed back into the system as input. In simple terms, it's when the result of an action influences what happens next. This might sound technical, but feedback loops are everywhere, in nature, in technology, in personal habits, and in society. There are two main types, positive and negative. A positive feedback loop amplifies change. For example, when a microphone picks up its own sound from a speaker, the noise grows louder and louder until it screeches. In nature, melting ice exposes dark ocean water, which absorbs more heat and melts more ice. The cycle accelerates itself. A negative feedback loop does the opposite. It stabilizes. Think of a thermostat. When the room gets too hot, the air conditioning turns on. When it cools down, the system shuts off. The goal is balance. In biology, your body uses negative feedback to regulate temperature, blood sugar, and countless other functions. Feedback loops also shape human behavior. If you study, do well on a test, and feel proud, you're more likely to study again. That's a reinforcing loop. But if you touch a hot stove and feel pain, you learn not to repeat the action. That's corrective feedback. In either case, your actions adapt based on results. Understanding feedback loops is essential for improving systems. They explain how habits form, how businesses scale, and how environmental systems shift over time. Without feedback, there's no learning, no adjustment, and no progress. But with the right kind of feedback, change becomes guided, responsive, and sustainable. In any evolving system, feedback loops are the mechanism that makes adaptation possible. Equilibrium. Equilibrium is what happens when everything holds still. Not because nothing is happening, but because all the forces pushing and pulling are perfectly balanced. In science, equilibrium is the state where opposing processes cancel each other out. Think of a seesaw with equal weight on both sides. Nothing moves, but there's still tension, an ongoing balance between forces. In chemistry, it's when a reaction is happening forward and backward at the same rate, so the overall concentration of substances stays constant. In biology, your body maintains internal equilibrium or homeostasis to keep your temperature, heart rate, and blood sugar within a narrow range. But equilibrium isn't just a scientific idea. It applies to markets, ecosystems, and even personal routines. Supply and demand in economics balance out at a price where buyers and sellers agree to trade. A stable ecosystem maintains equilibrium between predator and prey, plant growth and decay. And in daily life, people seek equilibrium between work and rest, stress and recovery. What's important to understand is that equilibrium is dynamic, not static. Systems are constantly adjusting, nudging back toward balance when something shifts. If your body overheats, it sweats. If prices spike, buyers back off. Equilibrium isn't a permanent destination. It's an ongoing process of correction. That also means equilibrium can sometimes be misleading. A system might appear stable while quietly building up pressure until it tips out of balance. Markets crash, ecosystems collapse, habits break down. So, while equilibrium brings order, too much stability can prevent necessary change. In complex systems, knowing how equilibrium works helps you understand when to maintain balance and when to disrupt it. It's not just about standing still. It's about knowing when stillness is helpful and when motion is required to keep the system from drifting too far off course. Bottlenecks. Every system has a weakest point, a place where progress slows, frustration builds, and everything backs up. That's the bottleneck. A bottleneck is the part of a system that limits how fast the whole thing can operate. It might be a single step in a manufacturing process, a person in a team who's overwhelmed, or a slow connection in a data network. No matter how fast the rest of the system moves, everything still has to pass through that narrow opening. It's a simple concept, but its impact is massive. If you want to improve how something works, the most effective place to start isn't by speeding up everything, it's by identifying and improving the bottleneck. This is the foundation of the theory of constraints. The idea is straightforward. The slowest part of the system sets the pace for everything else. Fix that, and you'll see the biggest gains. Bottlenecks can also shift over time. You solve one, and another appears in a different part of the process. That's why systems need regular review. What worked yesterday might be what's holding you back today. But not all bottlenecks are problems. Sometimes they exist for a reason. A security checkpoint delays passengers, but it also protects them. A review step in a publishing process slows down output, but ensures accuracy. In cases like these, the bottleneck is a safeguard, not a flaw. Understanding bottlenecks helps you think clearly about efficiency, priorities, and flow. It's not about removing every obstacle, it's about knowing which ones matter. By focusing on the true constraint, you can create the most impact with the least effort. Scale. Scaling up isn't just about doing more, it's about doing differently. In any system, scale refers to size and capacity, whether it's a business, a process, or a recipe. Scaling means increasing output without everything falling apart. But here's the catch. Bigger doesn't just mean more of the same. It often means something else entirely. Take a simple example. Making pancakes for a family of 4. You mix ingredients in a bowl and cook on a stovetop. But what if you're serving 400? You can't just multiply everything by 100 and hope for the best. You'll need industrial mixers, commercial griddles, and a team to manage the workflow. The recipe hasn't changed, but the process has. That's the core challenge of scale. What works at one level may completely break at another. A startup might thrive on informal communication and flexible roles. But as it grows, the lack of structure becomes a liability. Bottlenecks emerge, decision-making slows down, systems that felt seamless start to strain. To scale successfully, you have to anticipate the friction points. You need to recognize which parts of the system are fragile and redesign them to handle increased volume. Sometimes that means automation. Sometimes it means delegation or restructuring. Often, it means letting go of what used to work. Importantly, scale doesn't always mean growing bigger. It can mean shrinking intelligently, focusing on what matters, trimming the excess, and tightening operations. Both directions require deliberate design. Thinking at scale is a mindset. It means asking not just, does this work now? But, will this still work when it's 10 times bigger or smaller? Because in systems, growth isn't linear, and if you don't plan for scale, scale becomes the problem. Margin of safety. A good decision isn't just about being right, it's about staying safe even when you're wrong. That's the purpose of a margin of safety, a built-in buffer that protects you from the unexpected. It's the difference between a plan that barely works under perfect conditions and one that still holds up when things go sideways. You'll find this principle everywhere. Engineers don't design bridges to carry exactly the average load. They overbuild them, often by a large factor. Why? Because weather changes, traffic patterns shift, and errors happen. The extra strength isn't waste, it's insurance. In personal finance, a margin of safety might look like spending less than you earn or having an emergency fund. These aren't exciting moves, but when life throws a surprise expense your way, that buffer becomes the reason you stay afloat. In investing, the same logic applies. Buying something well below its estimated value gives you a cushion. If your estimate is off, you still have room before taking a loss. Without that gap, even a small mistake can become a big problem. Of course, margin of safety comes at a cost. You might use more resources than absolutely necessary. You might pass up opportunities that seem more aggressive. But that's the trade-off: short-term efficiency versus long-term resilience. Systems built without margin tend to work well until they don't. They collapse at the first sign of stress. The ones that last are designed with space to bend, not break. When uncertainty is part of the equation, margin of safety isn't optional. It's the quiet layer of protection that separates fragile from durable, not because everything goes as planned, but because it rarely does. Churn. Churn is what happens when the people you worked hard to attract slowly start walking away. In business, churn usually refers to customer turnover, the percentage of users or clients who stop using your product or service over a given time. It's easy to focus on growth, on new sign-ups and expanding markets. But if your churn is high, that growth may be an illusion. You're pouring water into a bucket with a hole in the bottom. Churn isn't always loud. It rarely shows up in a single event. It's subtle, a missed renewal, a drop in usage, a quiet drift towards something better or simply easier. And it happens in more places than business. Employees leave companies. Friends fade out of your life. Subscribers unsubscribe. It's a universal pattern. People exit systems, and those systems must constantly adjust. But churn isn't always bad. In some cases, it's a healthy mechanism. Letting go of users who weren't a good fit can help you focus on the ones who are. Losing employees can open the door for better alignment. Even in ecosystems, species turnover helps balance the system over time. The key is to understand the balance. Too much churn and the system becomes unstable. Too little and it may stagnate. Smart systems account for churn. They track it, learn from it, and design for it. They focus not just on acquisition, but on retention, keeping the people they already have by consistently delivering value. Churn may not make headlines, but understanding it, where it happens, why it happens, and how to manage it is one of the clearest signs of whether something is truly built to last. Algorithms. Algorithms are everywhere, even if you don't notice them. At their core, an algorithm is just a set of instructions, a step-by-step process for solving a problem or completing a task. It's like a recipe. Add ingredients in a specific order, follow the timing, and you get a predictable result. But unlike recipes, algorithms are designed to be precise, repeatable, and efficient, especially when decisions need to be made quickly and consistently. In computer science, algorithms are the heart of every function, from sorting your emails to suggesting your next video. They decide what you see and when you see it. But the idea goes far beyond software. An algorithm is used whenever you follow a system. A teacher grading papers with a rubric is following an algorithm. A traffic light that changes based on sensors is running one too. The goal is to simplify complexity. Instead of making every decision from scratch, you use a rulebook that's been refined for results. That's why algorithms are so powerful. They scale decision-making, reduce randomness, and allow systems to handle massive amounts of data without falling apart. But algorithms also reflect the rules they're built on. If the rules are flawed or biased, the outcomes can be too. That's why understanding them is so important. They aren't magic. They're tools. Tools that amplify whatever logic they're given. Used well, algorithms can streamline systems, reduce errors, and help us make better decisions. Misused or misunderstood, they can quietly shape outcomes in ways no one sees until it's too late. Knowing how they work is no longer just a technical skill. It's a basic form of literacy in the modern world. Critical mass. In the beginning, progress can feel painfully slow, like pouring drops into a giant bucket and wondering if it will ever fill. But at some point, everything changes. That shift is what we call critical mass. Critical mass is the threshold where a system tips from unstable to self-sustaining. It comes from nuclear physics. where a certain amount of radioactive material is needed to trigger a chain reaction. But outside of science, it's a powerful way to understand change in everyday systems, social, economic, behavioral. In a workplace, a few people trying a new tool won't change much, but once enough employees adopt it, using it becomes the default. That's critical mass. In a social movement, a handful of voices might be easy to ignore, but when enough people show up, the conversation shifts. What was once marginal becomes mainstream. The same idea applies to personal habits. Flossing for 3 days feels like nothing, but after a few weeks, you cross a threshold. Habit replaces willpower. That's a micro version of critical mass. The key insight is that systems don't always respond proportionally. Adding one more unit of effort doesn't always create one more unit of change. But once the right conditions build up, a small addition can flip the whole system. This makes critical mass both a warning and an opportunity. If you're below the threshold, change feels stuck. But once you pass it, momentum takes over. What felt heavy now starts to move on its own. Understanding critical mass helps you think more clearly about timing, scale, and strategy. Whether you're trying to build something, influence behavior, or change direction, the challenge is often less about pushing harder and more about reaching the point where everything starts to push back. Emergence. A traffic jam isn't caused by one driver hitting the brakes. It's caused by many drivers each reacting to the one in front. No single person plans it, but the jam still forms. That's emergence. Emergence is when simple parts combine to produce something new and often unexpected. It's not built in. It's not obvious from the parts themselves. But when enough pieces come together and interact in the right way, a new pattern appears. Think about an ant colony. A single ant follows basic rules. Find food, avoid danger, follow trails. But when thousands of ants do this together, they build complex nests, organize labor, and adapt to their environment. No ant is in charge. The colony's intelligence is emergent. It comes from the interaction, not the individual parts. The same happens in the human brain. Neurons fire in patterns. Each one is a basic on-off switch. But when billions of them connect, thoughts emerge, consciousness emerges. You don't program a brain to think. It just happens when the right components link up. Emergence shows up in software, in cities, in ecosystems. A flock of birds moves like one shape in the sky, even though each bird only follows a few simple rules. The same applies to markets, cultures, and even language. No single person designs them. They emerge from interaction. What makes emergence powerful is that it scales. You don't need to understand or control the entire system. You just need to design the right local rules and let them play out. Sometimes out of simplicity comes something incredibly complex, and sometimes surprisingly elegant. Recognizing emergence helps us see patterns where we might otherwise see noise. It's a reminder that big things often grow, not from a blueprint, but from small local actions repeated again and again. Irreducibility. Some things just don't make sense when you take them apart. That's the core of irreducibility. The idea that not everything can be explained by analyzing smaller pieces. In some systems, the whole is not just more than the sum of its parts. It's something entirely different. Take consciousness, for example. You can study neurons, brain chemistry, and electrical signals, but no single element tells you what it feels like to be alive. The experience only emerges when everything comes together. Break it down too far, and you lose what you're trying to understand. Irreducibility shows up in other places too. A city isn't just buildings, roads, and people. It's traffic patterns, culture, innovation, and tension, all unfolding through interaction. You can't predict how a city works by studying just one person or one street. This idea pushes back against the instinct to simplify everything. Sometimes, complexity isn't a puzzle to be solved, but a reality to be respected. Certain problems, like climate change, human behavior, or markets, aren't broken because we haven't found the missing piece. They're hard to fix because they can't be reduced. They're made up of overlapping, shifting parts that change depending on how you look at them. That doesn't mean these problems are hopeless. It means the solution isn't always in the details. Sometimes you need to zoom out. Ask not what each part is doing, but how the whole behaves. Recognizing irreducibility helps you avoid wasting energy on oversimplified explanations. It encourages a more realistic, system-level view. One that accepts that not all complexity can be conquered, but that it can be better understood. Trud's ancient lessons that still hold true today. Part 5. So far, we've explored how ancient wisdom provides timeless frameworks for understanding reality and making decisions. We've seen how mental models from thousands of years ago still guide us through complexity, help us think more clearly, and navigate uncertainty. But wisdom isn't just about thinking, it's about living. And as we continue our journey through these 100 lessons, we discover that some of the most profound insights deal with how we handle the messiness of human existence itself. The ancient world understood something we often forget, that being human means being imperfect, being limited, and being part of something much larger than ourselves. They developed principles not just for success, but for failure, not just for certainty, but for doubt, not just for control, but for acceptance. These lessons remind us that wisdom isn't about having all the answers. It's about asking better questions and finding peace with the complexity of existence. Let's continue with Lesson 41, the nature of paradox. Ancient philosophers, from Zeno to Lao Tzu, recognized that reality often contains contradictions that can't be resolved through simple logic. The sage is both wise and ignorant. Strength sometimes comes from yielding. The fastest route isn't always the most direct. This isn't intellectual confusion. It's an acknowledgement that life operates beyond the boundaries of neat categories. Modern science confirms this. Quantum particles exist in multiple states simultaneously, and light behaves as both wave and particle. Learning to hold paradox without rushing to resolve it is a mark of mature thinking. Lesson 42. The power of negative space. In ancient Chinese art and philosophy, what isn't there is often more important than what is. The usefulness of a bowl lies in its emptiness. The power of a door is in the opening, not the wood. This principle extends far beyond aesthetics. In communication, silence carries meaning. In design, white space creates clarity. In relationships, giving someone space can deepen connection. In leadership, knowing when not to act is often more powerful than action itself. The ancients understood that creation and destruction, presence and absence are partners in the dance of existence. Lesson 43. The illusion of permanence. Buddhist and Stoic philosophers both recognized that impermanence is the only constant. Everything changes. Our bodies, our circumstances, our relationships, our civilizations. Fighting this reality creates suffering. Accepting it creates freedom. This doesn't mean becoming passive or nihilistic. Instead, it means holding lightly to outcomes while committing fully to the process. When you understand that nothing lasts forever, you can appreciate what you have without clinging to it, and you can face loss without being destroyed by it. Lesson 44. The virtue of intellectual humility. Socrates claimed to know only that he knew nothing. Confucius said the wise person knows what they know and knows what they don't know. Ancient wisdom traditions consistently point to intellectual humility as a foundation of learning. The moment you think you've figured it all out is the moment you stop growing. This principle is more relevant than ever in an age of information overload and strong opinions. The wisest people are often the quickest to say, "I don't know," or "I was wrong." They understand that certainty is often the enemy of truth. Lesson 45. The ecology of virtue. Ancient Greek and Chinese philosophers understood that virtues don't exist in isolation. Courage without wisdom becomes recklessness. Compassion without boundaries becomes enabling. Justice without mercy becomes cruelty. Wisdom without action becomes paralysis. The ancients saw virtue as an interconnected system where each quality balances and supports the others. This is why character development was seen as a lifelong practice, not a checklist of behaviors. True virtue emerges from the dynamic balance of seemingly competing qualities. Lesson 46. The power of ritual and routine. Modern culture often dismisses ritual as empty tradition, but ancient wisdom recognized its profound psychological value. Rituals create meaning, mark transitions, and provide stability in an uncertain world. They help us process grief, celebrate joy, and connect with something larger than ourselves. Even simple daily routines, morning meditation, evening reflection, regular meals, create structure that supports mental and emotional health. The form matters less than the intention and consistency. Lesson 47. The importance of lineage and tradition. While innovation and progress are valuable, ancient cultures understood the importance of learning from those who came before. Knowledge isn't just information, it's wisdom tested by time and refined through generations. This doesn't mean blind adherence to the past, but rather respectful engagement with it. The best innovations often come from understanding tradition deeply enough to improve upon it thoughtfully. Lesson 48. The principle of sufficient reason. Gottfried Leibniz formalized this idea, but ancient philosophers intuited it. Everything that exists has a reason for existing, and everything that happens has a reason for happening. This doesn't mean everything happens for a good reason, or that we can always understand the reason, but it suggests that the universe operates according to intelligible principles, even when those principles are hidden from us. This framework encourages us to look for patterns, seek understanding, and trust that meaning exists even in chaos. Lesson 49. The danger of extremes. Aristotle's golden mean, Buddhism's middle way, and Confucian moderation all point to the same insight. Extremes tend to generate their opposites. Too much order creates rebellion. Too much freedom creates chaos. Too much safety creates weakness. Too much risk creates destruction. The wise person seeks the dynamic balance between extremes, understanding that virtue usually lies not in avoiding all poles, but in moving skillfully between them as circumstances require. Lesson 50. The art of strategic withdrawal. Sometimes the best action is no action. Sometimes the wisest response is to step back. Ancient military strategists, from Sun Tzu to the Romans, understood that retreat could be a form of advance. This principle applies far beyond warfare. In arguments, withdrawal can preserve relationships. In business, pulling back from a market can conserve resources for better opportunities. In personal growth, periods of rest and reflection are often more valuable than constant striving. Lesson 51. The reality of trade-offs. Ancient wisdom consistently reminds us that you can't have everything. Every choice forecloses other possibilities. Every gain requires some loss. This isn't pessimism, it's realism. When you accept that trade-offs are inevitable, you can make them consciously rather than pretending they don't exist. You can weigh costs and benefits honestly. You can appreciate what you choose without constantly second-guessing yourself. Lesson 52. The value of constraints. Freedom without limits becomes chaos. creativity without boundaries becomes meaningless. Ancient artists and thinkers understood that constraints often enhance rather than limit expression. A sonnet's beauty emerges from its rigid structure. A river's power comes from its banks. In your own life, self-imposed constraints, whether in diet, spending, or time use, can create the focus needed for meaningful achievement. Lesson 53, the power of story. Humans are storytelling creatures. We don't just gather facts, we weave them into narratives that give life meaning. Ancient cultures understood this and used stories, myths, and parables to transmit wisdom across generations. The stories you tell yourself about your life shape your experience more than the raw facts do. Choose your narratives carefully. Ask whether the story you're living is one that serves you and others. Lesson 54, the importance of community. No one becomes wise in isolation. Ancient philosophy was often practiced in communities, the academy, the lyceum, the sangha. Wisdom emerges from dialogue, from testing ideas against other minds, from the friction of different perspectives. Even solitary practices like meditation or reading gain their power from connection to a larger tradition. Seek out others who share your commitment to growth, even if they challenge your assumptions. Lesson 55, the practice of memento mori. Remember that you will die. This isn't morbid, it's liberating. When you truly internalize your mortality, trivial concerns fall away. You focus on what matters. You appreciate what you have. You treat others with more compassion, knowing they too are temporary. You take meaningful risks because you understand that the greatest risk is living an unlived life. Lesson 56, the wisdom of seasons. Nature moves in cycles, and so do human lives. There are times for planting and times for harvesting, times for growth and times for rest, times for expansion and times for contraction. Fighting against your current season creates suffering. Accepting it creates flow. If you're in a difficult season, remember that it will pass. If you're in a good season, appreciate it without grasping. Lesson 57, the art of asking questions. Socratic dialogue revolutionized human thought, not by providing answers, but by asking better questions. Questions open minds. Questions reveal assumptions. Questions create space for new possibilities. The quality of your life is largely determined by the quality of the questions you ask. Instead of, why me? Ask, what can I learn? Instead of, what's wrong? Ask, what's possible? Lesson 58, the principle of non-attachment. This doesn't mean not caring. It means caring without clinging. You can love deeply while holding lightly. You can pursue goals passionately while accepting outcomes gracefully. Non-attachment is often misunderstood as indifference, but it's actually the opposite. When you're not attached to specific outcomes, you can respond to reality as it is rather than as you wish it were. Lesson 59, the value of contemplation. In a world that rewards constant action, ancient wisdom reminds us of the power of stillness. Contemplation isn't passivity, it's active engagement with ideas, experiences, and questions. It's the space where insights emerge, where understanding deepens, where wisdom crystallizes. Regular periods of contemplation, whether through meditation, journaling, or simply quiet reflection, are essential for a meaningful life. Lesson 60, the interconnectedness of all things. Ancient philosophies from East and West recognize that nothing exists in isolation. Every action has consequences that ripple outward. Every person is connected to every other person through an invisible web of relationships. Your well-being and the well-being of others are ultimately inseparable. This isn't just philosophy, it's practical wisdom. When you understand interconnection, you naturally become more careful with your words and actions. These 20 lessons remind us that ancient wisdom isn't about retreating to the past. It's about recognizing timeless patterns that remain relevant regardless of technological or social change. They point to a way of living that honors both individual growth and collective responsibility, that embraces both ambition and acceptance, that seeks both understanding and mystery. As we continue this exploration, we see that these lessons don't provide easy answers, but rather frameworks for navigating complexity with grace. They remind us that wisdom isn't a destination, but a journey, not a possession, but a practice. In a world that often feels chaotic and uncertain, these ancient insights offer something invaluable, a way of being that has sustained humans through millennia of challenge and change. The next 20 lessons will explore how these principles apply to the specific challenges of relationships, leadership, and finding meaning in an age of unprecedented possibility and uncertainty. Because ultimately, wisdom isn't just about understanding the world, it's about living well within it. Part 6: Ancient Mental Models for Decision-Making and Relationships. We've explored how ancient wisdom provides frameworks for understanding complexity, uncertainty, and systems. Now we turn to one of the most practical applications of this wisdom, how it guides us in making better decisions and building stronger relationships. These lessons, tested across millennia, offer timeless insights into human nature, social dynamics, and the art of choosing well. Mental models for better decisions. The paradox of choice. Ancient philosophers understood something that modern psychology has only recently confirmed. Having too many options can paralyze us rather than liberate us. The Stoics practiced what they called preferred indifference, recognizing that while we might have preferences, attachment to having unlimited choices often leads to suffering rather than satisfaction. This ancient insight helps explain why decision fatigue is so common in our modern world of endless options. The solution isn't to eliminate choice entirely, but to understand that good enough is often better than perfect, and that the energy spent agonizing over minor decisions could be better invested elsewhere. Satisficing over maximizing. Long before economists coined the term satisficing, ancient wisdom traditions recognized the futility of always seeking the absolute best option. The concept appears in Buddhist teachings about the middle path and in Confucian ideals of moderation. The ancients understood that constantly seeking to maximize every outcome leads to endless comparison, regret, and missed opportunities. Sometimes choosing the first good option and moving forward creates better results than endlessly optimizing for the perfect choice. The wisdom of constraints. Paradoxically, limitations often enhance rather than diminish our decision-making ability. Ancient craftspeople, poets, and philosophers understood this intuitively. The haiku's rigid structure enables rather than restricts poetic expression. Traditional apprenticeships provided clear boundaries that accelerated rather than hindered learning. Modern research confirms what the ancients knew. Constraints force creativity, reduce decision paralysis, and often lead to more innovative solutions than unlimited freedom. The key is choosing your constraints wisely rather than letting them choose you. Temporal perspective in decision-making. Ancient wisdom consistently emphasized the importance of time perspective in making good choices. The Native American tradition of considering the impact of decisions on 7 generations ahead, Stoic practices of imagining one's deathbed perspective, and Buddhist contemplation of impermanence all serve to expand our temporal frame of reference. This long-term thinking helps counter our natural bias toward immediate rewards and helps us make choices that serve our deeper values rather than momentary impulses. The question, how will I feel about this decision in 10 years, often clarifies what the right choice should be. Ancient principles for relationships. Reciprocity and social exchange. The principle of reciprocity appears in virtually every ancient culture, from the golden rule to the concept of karma to indigenous gift economies. But ancient wisdom understood reciprocity as more nuanced than simple tit-for-tat exchange. True reciprocity involves understanding that what we give and receive may not be identical in form or timing. Sometimes we give material support and receive emotional comfort. Sometimes we contribute during someone's time of need and receive help during our own crisis years later. The key insight is that healthy relationships involve a general balance of giving and receiving over time, not perfect transactional equality. The power of presence. Before the age of constant distraction, ancient traditions understood the transformative power of full presence. Whether in Zen meditation, the Jewish concept of mindful attention, or indigenous practices of deep listening, the ability to be fully present with another person was recognized as both a skill and a gift. Modern neuroscience confirms what contemplatives have long known. When we feel truly seen and heard, our nervous systems calm, our defensive patterns soften, and our capacity for connection expands. The simple act of putting away distractions and offering someone our complete attention remains one of the most powerful tools for building relationships. Understanding versus agreement. Ancient wisdom traditions consistently distinguish between understanding someone and agreeing with them. Confucian ideals emphasize the importance of truly comprehending another's perspective before responding. Buddhist practices develop methods for holding space for viewpoints without immediately judging them. This distinction is crucial for navigating conflict and difference. We can understand why someone holds a particular view or makes certain choices without necessarily endorsing those choices. This understanding often diffuses conflict and creates space for genuine dialogue rather than mere position-taking. The ecology of trust. Trust, according to ancient wisdom, is not a simple binary state, but an ecosystem that requires cultivation and maintenance. Indigenous cultures understood trust as something that exists not just between individuals, but within communities, requiring ongoing attention to reciprocity, reliability, and shared values. The ancients recognized that trust is built through small, consistent actions over time, rather than grand gestures. It's maintained through transparency about our limitations and mistakes, rather than attempts to appear perfect. And when trust is broken, repair requires not just apology, but changed behavior and patience for the natural healing process. Navigating social dynamics. Status versus dignity. Ancient hierarchical societies understood the difference between status, one's position in a social hierarchy, and dignity, one's inherent worth as a human being. Confucian ideals, for instance, emphasize that while social roles might create different responsibilities and privileges, all people deserved basic respect and consideration. This distinction helps us navigate modern social dynamics more skillfully. We can acknowledge differences in expertise, responsibility, or achievement without losing sight of fundamental human equality. We can compete for positions or recognition without dehumanizing others or tying our self-worth to external measures of success. The art of influence. Ancient traditions develop sophisticated understandings of ethical influence. Rather than manipulation or coercion, they emphasized leading by example, appealing to shared values, and creating conditions where others could discover wisdom for themselves. The Taoist concept of Wu Wei, or effortless action, suggests that the most powerful influence often comes through creating space for others to change, rather than forcing change upon them. Socratic questioning demonstrates how asking good questions can be more transformative than providing answers. These approaches respect others' autonomy while still allowing us to share our perspectives and values. Boundaries and compassion. One of the most sophisticated insights of ancient wisdom is that healthy boundaries and genuine compassion are not opposites, but complementary practices. Buddhist concepts of loving kindness emphasize caring for others without taking responsibility for their choices. Stoic practices involve offering help while accepting that others must ultimately live their own lives. Setting boundaries isn't about being selfish or uncaring. It's about creating sustainable conditions for genuine care. When we give beyond our capacity or enable others' dysfunction, we often end up resentful and exhausted, helping no one. Healthy boundaries allow us to offer our gifts consistently over time, rather than burning out in spectacular fashion. Decision-making under uncertainty. The role of intuition. While ancient wisdom valued rational analysis, it also recognized intuition as a legitimate and important source of information. Indigenous traditions speak of gut feelings and dreams as sources of guidance. Eastern philosophies develop practices for accessing inner wisdom. Even Greek rationalists like Aristotle wrote about practical wisdom that goes beyond pure logic. Modern neuroscience suggests that what we call intuition often represents the rapid processing of pattern recognition and emotional information that occurs below the threshold of consciousness. Ancient practices for cultivating intuition, meditation, time in nature, journaling, contemplative reading, may help us access this valuable source of information more reliably. Accepting imperfect information. Ancient leaders and merchants had to make crucial decisions with far less information than we have access to today. Yet their decision-making frameworks remain remarkably sophisticated. They understood that waiting for perfect information often means missing opportunities entirely. Instead, ancient wisdom emphasizes making the best decision possible with available information, remaining flexible as new information emerges, and accepting that some uncertainty is simply part of the human condition. This approach reduces anxiety about making wrong choices and increases our ability to adapt when circumstances change. The wisdom of councils. Many ancient societies developed formal and informal practices for collective decision-making. Indigenous councils, philosophical dialogues, and advisory traditions all recognize that important decisions benefit from multiple perspectives and shared wisdom. Even when we must make individual choices, we can apply this principle by seeking input from trusted advisors, considering how our decisions affect others, and recognizing the limitations of our own perspective. The goal isn't to abdicate responsibility for our choices, but to make them from a broader foundation of wisdom and understanding. Building character through choices. Virtue as skill. Ancient Greek concepts of virtue understood moral excellence not as rule following, but as skill development. Courage, honesty, generosity, and wisdom were seen as capabilities that could be developed through practice, just like musical or athletic abilities. This perspective transforms how we think about character development. Instead of seeing moral failures as evidence of fundamental flaws, we can view them as learning opportunities. Instead of expecting perfection from ourselves or others, we can focus on the direction of growth and the consistency of effort. The compound effect of small choices. Ancient wisdom consistently emphasized that character is built through small daily choices rather than dramatic moments. Confucian self-cultivation practices, Christian spiritual disciplines, and Stoic daily examinations all focus on the cumulative impact of seemingly minor decisions. This insight is particularly relevant in our age of instant gratification. the choices that matter most for our long-term flourishing, how we treat people when no one is watching, how we respond to minor frustrations, how we spend our discretionary time, often feel insignificant in the moment, but compound over time into the patterns that define our lives. Integration and authenticity. Perhaps most importantly, ancient wisdom emphasized the integration of our various roles and relationships into a coherent sense of self. The goal wasn't to be perfect, but to be authentic, to align our actions with our deepest values across different contexts and relationships. This integration requires ongoing reflection and adjustment. It means developing the capacity to be honest about our limitations while still striving for growth. It means finding ways to express our core values through our specific circumstances, rather than waiting for ideal conditions to begin living meaningfully. The decision-making and relationship wisdom of ancient traditions offers us tested frameworks for navigating the eternal human challenges of choice, connection, and character development. These insights don't provide easy answers, but they offer reliable guidance for the ongoing work of building a life worth living and relationships worth maintaining. In our next section, we'll explore how ancient wisdom helps us understand and work with natural cycles, change, and the deeper patterns that govern both individual lives and collective human experience. Part 7. Ancient lessons that still hold true today. The threads of history have been woven through countless generations, carrying with them insights that transcend time itself. As we continue exploring these enduring truths, we find ourselves confronting patterns that seem as relevant today as they were thousands of years ago. These ancient lessons, tested by centuries of human experience, offer us something precious: clarity in an age of overwhelming complexity. Think about the moment when you face a difficult decision. Your mind races through possibilities, weighing options, searching for the right path forward. In that moment of uncertainty, you're experiencing something fundamentally human, something your ancestors faced in their own ways, with their own challenges. The circumstances change, but the underlying patterns remain remarkably consistent. What makes these ancient insights so powerful is their ability to cut through the noise of modern life and reveal the deeper structures that govern human experience. They remind us that beneath all our technological advancement and cultural evolution, we're still navigating the same essential challenges: how to make good decisions, how to build meaningful relationships, how to find purpose in uncertainty, and how to grow from both success and failure. Consider the concept of Stoic resilience, developed in ancient Greece and Rome. The Stoics understood something profound about human psychology: that our suffering often comes not from external events themselves, but from our interpretation of those events. This isn't merely philosophical speculation, it's a practical framework that countless people have used to navigate hardship, loss, and adversity. When Marcus Aurelius wrote his personal reflections in Meditations, he wasn't creating abstract philosophy. He was documenting a practical approach to leadership and life that helped him govern an empire while maintaining his humanity. His insights about accepting what we cannot control while focusing our energy on what we can influence remain as relevant for a modern entrepreneur, parent, or student as they were for a Roman emperor. The ancient Chinese concept of Wu Wei, often translated as effortless action, offers another timeless insight. It suggests that the most effective approach isn't always the most forceful one. Sometimes, the best strategy is to work with natural forces rather than against them, to find leverage rather than apply brute strength. This principle shows up everywhere, from martial arts to business strategy to personal relationships. Think about water flowing around a rock. It doesn't try to break through by force. It finds the path of least resistance and eventually shapes the landscape itself. This metaphor has guided strategic thinking for millennia because it captures something essential about how sustainable change actually happens. The concept of rhythm and cycles, understood by ancient agricultural societies, offers crucial wisdom for our modern lives. These cultures recognized that growth requires periods of activity and rest, expansion and consolidation, sowing and harvesting. They built their societies around these natural rhythms, understanding that sustainable progress isn't about constant acceleration. It's about finding the right timing for action and reflection. Today, we often try to maintain constant productivity, forgetting that creativity and insight require periods of apparent inactivity. The ancient understanding of cycles reminds us that what looks like downtime is often when our minds process, integrate, and prepare for the next phase of growth. Ancient wisdom also understood the power of story and narrative in shaping human behavior. Long before modern psychology discovered the importance of mental models, ancient cultures used myths, parables, and folk tales to transmit complex truths about human nature and social dynamics. These stories weren't just entertainment. They were sophisticated technologies for encoding and transmitting practical wisdom across generations. The hero's journey, found in cultures around the world, isn't just a narrative structure. It's a map of personal transformation. It describes the predictable stages of growth, the call to adventure, the resistance to change, the mentor's guidance, the trials and tribulations, the transformation, and the return with new wisdom. This pattern appears everywhere, from career transitions to recovery from addiction to entrepreneurial ventures, because it captures something fundamental about how humans actually change and grow. Ancient legal traditions understood something crucial about justice that we sometimes forget in our modern systems. They recognized that laws without wisdom become rigid and oppressive, while wisdom without structure becomes chaotic and arbitrary. The best legal frameworks balanced firm principles with flexible application, creating systems that could adapt to specific circumstances while maintaining core values. The concept of precedent, which forms the backbone of many legal systems, embodies this balance. It provides consistency and predictability while allowing for evolution and refinement over time. This approach recognizes that human societies are complex, dynamic systems that require both stability and adaptability. Ancient economic principles also offer valuable insights for modern financial decision-making. The concept of diversification, for instance, appears in ancient texts as a basic principle of risk management. The idea that you shouldn't put all your resources in one basket isn't modern financial theory. It's practical wisdom that has protected wealth and enabled prosperity for thousands of years. Similarly, the ancient understanding of debt and leverage recognized that borrowed resources could amplify both gains and losses. Ancient cultures developed sophisticated approaches to credit and finance that balanced opportunity with security. Understanding that sustainable prosperity requires careful management of risk. The ancient practice of apprenticeship reveals deep insights about learning and skill development. Rather than trying to absorb information quickly and move on, the apprenticeship model recognized that mastery requires time, repetition, and gradual progression through increasing levels of responsibility. This approach understood that real expertise isn't just about knowing facts. It's about developing intuition, judgment, and the ability to adapt knowledge to new situations. Modern research on expertise confirms what ancient craftsmen knew intuitively: that becoming truly skilled requires about 10,000 hours of deliberate practice. But the apprenticeship model went further, recognizing that learning happens best in real-world contexts, with immediate feedback and under the guidance of someone who has already walked the path. Ancient cultures also understood something profound about the relationship between individual fulfillment and social responsibility. They recognize that human beings thrive when they feel connected to something larger than themselves, when their personal growth contributes to the well-being of their community. This wasn't just moral philosophy, it was practical psychology that created more resilient and sustainable societies. The concept of civic virtue, developed in ancient republics, understood that democracy requires citizens who are willing to sacrifice short-term personal interests for long-term collective benefit. This principle remains essential for any functioning democratic society, reminding us that freedom and responsibility are inseparable. Ancient spiritual traditions, regardless of their specific beliefs, developed sophisticated practices for managing attention, emotion, and consciousness. Meditation, prayer, ritual, and contemplation weren't just religious activities, they were technologies for mental training that helped people develop greater self-awareness, emotional regulation, and clarity of thought. Modern neuroscience has validated many of these practices, showing that regular meditation literally changes brain structure in ways that improve focus, reduce stress, and increase empathy. What ancient practitioners discovered through centuries of experimentation, we can now measure and verify using modern instruments. The ancient understanding of mentorship and teaching also offers timeless insights. Great teachers throughout history understood that their job wasn't just to transfer information, but to awaken curiosity, challenge assumptions, and guide students toward their own discoveries. The Socratic method, developed in ancient Athens, remains one of the most effective approaches to education because it engages the student as an active participant rather than a passive recipient. This approach recognized that lasting learning happens when students discover insights for themselves, with the teacher serving as a guide rather than a lecturer. It's a model that works just as well in modern classrooms, corporate training programs, and personal development contexts. Ancient architectural principles offer another domain of enduring wisdom. The structures that have survived for millennia weren't just built to be impressive. They were designed according to principles of proportion, balance, and integration with natural forces. These buildings teach us about sustainability, beauty, and the relationship between form and function. The golden ratio, discovered by ancient mathematicians and used by ancient architects, appears throughout nature and continues to guide design in everything from websites to city planning. This mathematical relationship creates proportions that feel naturally pleasing to the human eye, suggesting deep connections between mathematics, aesthetics, and human psychology. Ancient approaches to conflict resolution also offer valuable lessons for modern disputes. Rather than focusing solely on winning or losing, many ancient traditions emphasized restoration, understanding, and the preservation of relationships. They recognized that conflicts often arise from misunderstanding rather than fundamental incompatibility, and that the goal should be finding solutions that address underlying needs rather than just surface positions. The ancient practice of restorative justice, which focused on healing harm rather than just punishing wrongdoing, has been rediscovered by modern criminal justice systems, seeking more effective approaches to reducing recidivism and rebuilding communities. These ancient insights remind us that human nature itself provides a kind of stability in an ever-changing world. While technologies, institutions, and circumstances evolve rapidly, the fundamental patterns of human behavior, motivation, and development remain remarkably consistent. This consistency means that wisdom tested across centuries of human experience can still guide us through contemporary challenges. The key is learning to recognize these timeless patterns beneath their modern manifestations. The same principles that helped ancient leaders navigate political complexity can help modern managers build effective teams. The same insights that helped ancient philosophers find meaning in difficult circumstances can help modern individuals cope with stress and uncertainty. As we move forward in an age of unprecedented change, these ancient lessons offer something invaluable: perspective. They remind us that many of the challenges we face aren't entirely new, that others have walked similar paths before us, and that human wisdom, accumulated over generations, provides reliable guidance for navigating uncertainty. The ancient world's greatest gift to us isn't its artifacts or monuments, it's its insights into the patterns that make human life meaningful, productive, and fulfilling. These lessons, tested by time and proven across cultures, offer us a foundation for building lives of purpose, relationships of depth, and communities of resilience. In a world that often feels chaotic and unpredictable, ancient wisdom provides an anchor, not by offering simple answers, but by teaching us how to ask better questions, how to think more clearly, and how to act with greater wisdom. These lessons remind us that while we cannot control all the circumstances we face, we can always choose how we respond to them. And that choice, made wisely, has the power to transform not just our own lives, but the lives of everyone around us. The remarkable thing about these 100 ancient lessons is that they remind us wisdom isn't about having the latest information or the newest technology. It's about understanding the fundamental patterns of human experience that have remained constant throughout history. When we study the insights of philosophers, leaders, and thinkers from thousands of years ago, we're not just learning about the past, we're discovering timeless tools for navigating our present and future challenges. These ancient principles serve as a compass in our rapidly changing world, helping us stay grounded in what truly matters while adapting to whatever comes next. So the next time you face a difficult decision or complex problem, remember that the wisdom you need may have already been discovered by someone who lived centuries before you. And that's not a limitation, but one of humanity's greatest strengths.